Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the grenade ball python. It's a pretty interesting combination of genes. It actually consists of two genes, the fire and the spark. And kind of the interesting thing between the combination of those two genes is if you look at each individual gene, they look kind of like normals. The spark looks pretty much like a yellow belly, and the fire looks like kind of a creamy colored normal. And when you actually combine them together, the result is you actually get something that looks kind of like a vanilla cream, which is pretty surprising for those two genes to come together to make a vanilla cream looking snake. And essentially what you have is you have a fire, which is in the black-eyed leucistic complex. So if you make a super fire, you get an all-white snake with black eyes, which is a black-eyed leucistic. And then the spark is in a completely different complex. It's actually in the yellow belly complex. And most people, when they think of the spark, they think of the yellow belly and the spark combination, which gives you the puma. So it's kind of interesting. You take one gene from the yellow belly complex and one gene from the black-eyed leucistic complex, and you mix them together to get a completely different visual appearance. And kind of the interesting thing is usually when that happens and two genes come together and you get a really unusual looking snake, you end up with an allelic combination, which means if you actually take it and breed it to something else, half the offspring would come out as fire and half would come out as spark. But in this case, it's actually not an allelic complex, which is even more confusing. It's a pretty unusual combination that's pretty surprising. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the ins and outs of the grenade ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the two genes that make up the grenade. And the first one I want to start with is the fire. This is what a fire looks like. And I'd say the fire is one of the most popular genes in ball pythons and probably one of the most useful. It's actually a lightning gene. And a lot of times when you work fire into other combinations, it'll really lighten and enhance a lot of your combinations, especially if you work it into some brightening genes like the pastel or the yellow belly or the orange dream. A lot of times if you work the fire in there, you can get really bright, super flashy snakes. And the fire can also clean up a lot of your axanthics, the completely black and white snakes that you make with the recessive axanthic gene. If you actually work fire and pastel in combinations, the fire really enhances the kind of the clean white background in a lot of your axanthics. And here is the other gene in the grenade, and that is the spark. And the spark is kind of hard to actually see a spark just by itself. It almost looks like a normal ball python. And usually you can tell a gene in the yellow belly complex. There's certain indicators that you'll actually see on some of them. Sometimes you'll actually see some of these on normals, but a lot of times you can pick out a gene in the yellow belly complex, such as the spark. And a lot of times you'll actually see some flaming coming up the sides. You can see kind of the flames, like an orange colored flame right between the alien heads. And kind of the telltale sign that you have a spark or any other gene in the yellow belly complex, you can flip over the snake and look at the belly, and a lot of times you'll see kind of a pixelation or kind of like checkering on either side of the belly that tells you that you have a gene in the yellow belly complex. So if you actually take the fire and you breed it to a spark, 25% of the time you'll actually get a grenade. And take a look at how different this looks compared to the fire and the spark. Pretty amazing combination. And there's not a whole lot of them over here on Morphmarket, and they're not really that expensive. I haven't even looked at the price on this. Take a look at this. This is actually sold for $150. So it's a really inexpensive way to jump into a kind of an awesome project where you can make some pretty amazing combinations, especially working other genes into the grenade. And at first glance, I was thinking, you know, it kind of seems like it's an allelic complex because of the interaction between the two genes, giving you a completely different visual appearance that I would consider to be kind of something in the allelic complex. So if you actually take a look at the genetic wizard, I actually came over here and plugged in the grenade with the spark and the fire, and I bred it to a normal, and then I hit calculate, and you can actually see over here where what I'm actually breeding over here is the grenade, the combination of the fire spark, breeding it to a normal. And sure enough, down here at the bottom, it actually gives you the results. So you get 25% normals, 25% spark, 25% fire, and you would reproduce the parent 25% of the time, and you would get the grenade. And I actually came over here and checked it over here on this other genetic calculator. There's actually two genetic calculators, and I always like to compare both of them. One is over here on Morphmarket, the other one is over on the World of Ball Python. So this one is the Morphmarket genetic calculator, and you can pretty much do the same thing, plug in the fire and the spark, hit calculate, and then it gives you the results. So you get 25%, 4 different results. And if it was actually allelic, you would only get 2 results. You would get only fires and sparks, 50-50. You wouldn't reproduce the parent. So take a look at this. I thought this was really close to the grenade as far as the visual appearance. This is actually a vanilla cream, which is the combination of the vanilla and the fire. And this is an allelic complex. This is kind of interesting that you get kind of a similar appearance as far as what you'd see kind of combining these two genes, comparing it to the grenade. And it's kind of interesting. I've actually seen some people where they look at certain combinations that produce a completely different visual appearance. And typically when we think of an allelic combination, I'd say most people think that the kind of the definition of an allelic complex is it acts like a super, meaning if you actually breed it to something else, you'll get half of one gene and half of the other, and you can't reproduce the parent, and you won't get any normals out of the combination. But I've actually seen some people where I think what they're talking about as far as an allelic complex is when you take two genes and you breed them together and you get a completely different visual appearance. Even though it doesn't act like a super, I think a lot of people call that an allelic complex, which gets a little bit, you know, what is the definition of an allelic complex? So if you actually take the vanilla cream, which is for sure in my book an allelic complex, you can actually bring it over to the genetic wizard and plug in the fire and the vanilla cream bred to a normal. If it actually is an allelic complex and it acts like a super, which I think is the definition of an allelic combination, you'll actually get 50% vanillas and 50% fires, which you'll actually see over here. And of course, I always want to double check with my other genetic calculator over here on Morphmarket, and I plugged in the same thing, the vanilla and the fire, and I got the same thing, 50-50 vanilla and fire. And there's one more I actually wanted to show you. This one's a little bit confusing. This looks pretty similar to the vanilla cream and the grenade. This is actually the Disco Inferno, the combination of the disco and the fire. And the disco looks really similar to the fire. As a matter of fact, if you actually take this and breed it to something else, you get all fire-looking snakes, and a lot of people can't tell the difference between a disco and the fire. They're really close in appearance. So this one is kind of interesting. If you bring it over here on the genetic calculator, plug it into the World of Ball Python genetic wizard, the disco and the fire, and you breed it to a normal, take a look at this. You'll actually get 4 different results: the normal, the fire, the disco, and the Disco Inferno, indicating that it's not an allelic complex. But if you actually come over here and double check on the other calculator over here on Morphmarket, take a look at this. This kind of blew me away. You get 2 different results. This one actually says this is an allelic complex with the disco and fire. And kind of the weird thing is I did a couple videos where I was talking about the Disco Inferno with the combination of the disco and the fire. And I came over here to the Morphmarket genetic calculator, and I pretty much took the word for this calculator, and I was like, all right, I know for sure that this is an allelic complex and it acts like a super. Come to find out, there's been quite a few people that chimed in the comments section under that video, and they're like, hey, I have a Disco Inferno and I can breed it to a normal, and I get normals, and I can reproduce the parent, indicating that it's not an allelic complex, which is kind of interesting. So I think technically this one may be incorrect, and I think it really depends on your definition of what an allelic complex is, because if you actually make the Disco Inferno, it looks completely different than either the fire or the disco. So as far as the visual appearance, it actually kind of interacts in an unusual way. So I wanted to show you one more gene over here mixed in with the grenade. So you can pretty much take any gene and work it into any of these combinations like the grenade, the disco inferno, or the vanilla cream. And you can make some really amazing combinations working other genes into them. And this is the GHI. The GHI is actually a dark gene. It really darkens and enhances the backgrounds of a lot of combos, and it really jumbles up the patterns. And take a look at this, what happens if you work the GHI into the grenade. Take a look at that. That is a pretty amazing combination. And kind of the thing that I really like about working with any of these combinations that give you this really crazy pattern is most of them are relatively inexpensive compared to a lot of your other combinations. So if you actually take a look at the price on this one, take a look at this. This sold in 2020 for only $400, which is pretty amazing. So you can get into a lot of these combinations. And the cool thing about the grenade is you can actually take the GHI Fire Spark and you could breed it to a normal, and since it's not allelic, potentially you could reproduce this exact snake, which is pretty awesome. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Danny Apodaca asks, how do you warm up multiple frozen rats for feeding? I have 45 snakes and it takes me a while using hot water in Ziploc baggies. And that is a very good question. So there's actually multiple ways you can warm up your rodents to feed your ball pythons or other snakes. And I've actually seen some people, what they'll do is they'll take frozen rodents right out of the freezer and throw them directly in a bucket of hot water without using any baggies or anything. And let me tell you, that kind of grosses me out. A whole bucket full of soaking wet frozen rodents. I absolutely will not do that. And to kind of get around the whole wet rodent thing, what a lot of people will do is they'll take the rodent and they'll put them in a baggie and then put that in the hot water to keep the rodents from getting wet. And that kind of works. But what I actually do here in my reptile room, I completely don't use water at all. What I actually do is I'll take all my rodents and I'll just lay them out on my table on some paper towels. Here in my reptile room, that's about 80 degrees. Usually it's between 75 and about 82 degrees here in my reptile room. And I'll just lay them out on the table and then I'll just wait for several hours. And usually it really depends on the size of the rat. So if I have some really big rats that I'm feeding my reticulated pythons, I pretty much have to put them out early in the morning to use them later on in the day. And what I like to do is I like to get them to where they're completely thawed out but a little bit cool to the touch, but they're completely thawed out all the way through the middle of the rat. And then what I'll do is I'll actually take them and I'll put them under a heat lamp to warm them up and kind of flip them over back and forth, get them nice and toasty warm before I feed them to my snakes. And kind of the interesting thing is you want to thaw them out at room temperature if you use that approach, but you don't want to let them sit too long when they're completely thawed out. So you kind of have to time it. So at the beginning of the morning, what I'll actually do is I'll take some of my bigger rodents and I'll lay them out here in my reptile room. And then about halfway through the day, I'll take some medium rodents, and then maybe just a few hours, maybe a couple hours before feeding, I'll take some really small ones, like if I'm feeding hatchlings or something like that. I'll put them out later in the day because you don't want them completely thawed out sitting in an 80-degree room, with no, they can kind of spoil if they sit for too long. And the other thing is if you put them under your heat lamp, you don't want to cook them too long because you can really overcook them under your heat lamp. I've actually seen some people where they had rodents explode from too much heat under the heat lamp. So it takes a little while to get used to. But let me tell you, it's the easiest way to just kind of plan it throughout the day. And what I actually do is I'll feed half my snakes on one day and then I'll feed half on the other, so I don't have any leftover rodents. So if I run into a problem, if you try to feed all your snakes in the same day, a lot of times you'll have too many rodents thawed out on that particular day, and sometimes you have to throw them away. Versus if you only feed half your collection at a time, a lot of times you'll have other takers that will take the leftover rodents. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.